The statistics are staggering. According to a study by the American Institute of Stress, 83% of workers suffer from work-related stress. The pressure from constant deadlines, meetings, and expectations often leads to burnout. Over 60% of professionals report feeling overwhelmed on a daily basis. These numbers are not just statistics, they represent real people, people like me who felt trapped in an unrelenting cycle of stress. The demands of high-pressure jobs, the constant juggling of tasks, the never-ending to-do lists. At times, it felt like I was drowning in it all. My body ached, my mind was clouded, and there were moments when I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep going at that pace. I still remember the first time I realized just how much the stress had consumed me. It wasn't the racing thoughts that kept me up at night, or the fact that I'd gone days without properly eating or sleeping. It wasn't the headaches that started to feel like a constant companion, or the tremors in my hands as I reached for my coffee cup. It was a simple moment, but it shook me to my core. I was sitting in a meeting surrounded by colleagues, but I couldn't focus on a single word being said. My mind was elsewhere, overwhelmed by the weight of everything I had to do. It was as if the world around me had gone silent and I was trapped in my own head, drowning in thoughts of the next task, the next deadline, the next thing I was expected to do. I tried to push through it, telling myself that I just needed to work harder. After all, that's what I had always done. Grit my teeth and push through the pain. But that approach wasn't working anymore. I wasn't just exhausted, I was broken. I felt like I was constantly sprinting but never reaching the finish line. No matter how much I gave, there was always more to do. I was spinning in a never-ending cycle, caught between wanting to succeed and realizing that the more I pushed, the further I seemed to fall behind. And then came the breakdown. I had been burning the candle at both ends for so long that my body finally couldn't keep up. I had trouble getting out of bed, my stomach was in knots, and I was on the edge of tears almost every day. There was this constant feeling of impending doom, as though I was just one step away from losing everything. I had become a shell of the person I once was. My colleagues noticed. My friends noticed. But I didn't have the energy to explain. I couldn't find the words to articulate the suffocating weight of it all. I tried to numb the pain. I threw myself deeper into my work, hoping that if I just kept moving, I wouldn't have to confront the growing emptiness inside me. But it only made things worse. The more I tried to outrun the stress, the more it consumed me. I couldn't focus. I made mistakes I had never made before. I couldn't be present for the people I loved, and even when I was physically there, my mind was miles away. I started to question everything. Was I cut out for this job? Was I capable of handling the pressure? Was it worth it? The tipping point came during a particularly rough week. I had missed a major deadline, one that had huge consequences for the company. I was in the office late trying to salvage what was left when my boss called me into his office. His disappointment was palpable, and I could feel it in my bones. I remember sitting there, my hands trembling as he spoke. It was like all the stress I had been carrying hit me in that moment. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I broke down. Right there in front of him, in front of my boss. I didn't know how to stop the tears, how to apologize for the mistake, how to explain just how overwhelmed I felt. But words failed me. I had no excuse, no solution, just a pile of frustration and exhaustion. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I walked out of that office feeling both defeated and relieved. I was exhausted, yes, but there was also a strange sense of freedom. I had hit rock bottom, and for the first time in a long time, I was forced to face the truth. I was not invincible. I couldn't keep ignoring the toll that stress was taking on my mind, my body, and my life. But I had no idea what to do next. I had no idea how to break free from this cycle that had consumed me for so long. How could I regain control? How could I find balance when everything felt so out of reach? How could I recover from this burnout and rebuild myself? I was lost, but somewhere deep down I knew I couldn't give up. I couldn't let this stress define me. So I took a deep breath and made a promise to myself. I would find a way to overcome this. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I was going to reclaim my life. It wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it was going to be the hardest thing I had ever done. But I was willing to do whatever it took to heal. Little did I know that the journey ahead would teach me more than I could have ever imagined about myself. I didn't have the answers yet, but I was determined to find them. And while I was still trapped in the whirlwind of stress and uncertainty, I held on to that hope. There was a way out. I just had to find it. What I learned in the months that followed transformed my life. I found techniques and strategies that helped me regain control of my mind, calm the chaos, and reconnect with myself. But I'll be honest with you, it wasn't an overnight fix. It took time, patience, and a lot of trial and error. And most importantly, I had to face the hard truth that I couldn't continue living in a constant state of stress without it taking a toll on my health and happiness. If you're feeling overwhelmed like I did, if you're stuck in the cycle of stress and burnout, know this: you are not alone. I've been there. I know how it feels to be trapped under the weight of it all, but I also know that it is possible to overcome it. The journey to healing and balance isn't easy, but it is worth it. And I promise you, after hearing my story and understanding the steps I took to transform my life, you will walk away with the tools you need to do the same. In the next section, I'll share the exact methods I used to break free from the stress and regain control of my life. Everything I've learned is in the book. I can't wait to show you the solutions that helped me reclaim my peace, my focus, and my life. The journey I went through wasn't easy. Every day felt like an uphill battle, and there were moments when I wanted to give up entirely. But as I continued to push forward, I began to realize something crucial. This struggle, this constant feeling of being overwhelmed, wasn't something I could simply power through anymore. It was a call for change. I couldn't keep ignoring it. And as difficult as it was, I had to face it head on. There were days when I felt completely defeated, like nothing would ever get better. I'd wake up with a pit in my stomach, dreading the day ahead. The emails, the meetings, the projects, it all felt like too much. And when the clock would strike 5 p.m., I'd find myself still working, convinced I needed to keep going to get ahead. But instead of feeling accomplished, I only felt more drained, more lost, and further from the person I used to be. The burnout was real. The mental fog was real. And for a long time, I thought it was something I just had to accept. But over time, I learned that I had more power than I realized. It wasn't about making bigger to-do lists or working longer hours. It was about reclaiming my mind and my life from the relentless stress that was weighing me down. It was about understanding that I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to have it all together all the time. And most importantly, I didn't need to keep suffering in silence. I started by taking small, intentional steps to regain control. I had to change my mindset, shift how I viewed my work and my own well-being. And even though it was hard, even though I wanted to quit many times, I kept going. I couldn't afford not to. I realized that if I didn't take action, if I didn't make a change, the stress would continue to control me. One of the hardest parts of my journey was learning how to take care of myself. For years, I had put everyone and everything else first. My work came first. My responsibilities came first. My own needs were always at the bottom of the list. But when I began to acknowledge the toll it was taking on me, physically, mentally, emotionally, I knew something had to change. I had to start putting myself at the top of the list. I had to prioritize my health, my peace, my happiness, no matter how much I felt like I couldn't afford it. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way. There were days when I felt like I was right back where I started, exhausted, overwhelmed, defeated. But slowly I began to see shifts. The more I took care of myself, the more I was able to manage the stress that used to consume me. It was like I was finally giving myself permission to be human. I realized that self-care wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. It wasn't selfish to take time for myself. It was essential for my survival. And as I started practicing mindfulness and learning to manage stress, I felt a weight slowly lifting off my shoulders. There were still moments of doubt, of fear. I questioned if I could really change. I questioned if I was truly capable of managing the stress and pressure I felt. But every time I started to lose hope, I reminded myself of what I had already overcome. I had come so far. I had faced the darkest parts of my struggle, and I was still standing. I realized that the power to transform my life was in my hands, and that realization was everything. As I continued to learn and grow, I found that I was becoming more present, more focused, and more at peace. It wasn't about getting rid of stress entirely. Stress is a part of life, but I had learned how to manage it, how to respond to it in a way that didn't completely derail me. I had learned how to step back and breathe, how to stay grounded in the midst of chaos. I had learned to be kinder to myself, to forgive myself when I wasn't perfect. And slowly my world started to change. I started showing up for myself in ways I never had before. I found the balance I had been so desperately seeking. There were still days when I struggled, days when the stress felt overwhelming again. But the difference now was that I had the tools to cope. I had built a foundation of mindfulness and self-care that allowed me to navigate those tough days with more clarity and grace. I no longer felt completely consumed by the pressure. I no longer felt like I was drowning in the expectations of others. I had reclaimed my sense of self. I had reclaimed my life. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it wasn't easy, but it was worth every single step. The journey was hard, but the rewards have been beyond anything I could have imagined. I am no longer a slave to stress. I have found a sense of peace that I never thought possible, and I'm finally living a life that feels balanced, fulfilled, and most importantly, under my control. I want you to know that if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're trapped in the cycle of stress and burnout, there is hope. You don't have to stay stuck. You can change. You can transform your life. I know it's hard and I know it feels impossible at times, but I've been there, and I'm here to tell you that it's possible. You can reclaim your peace, your health, and your happiness. The solutions are within reach. And trust me when I say that the steps I took to overcome it all, the ones that helped me heal and regain control of my life, are exactly what you need too. In the next part of this journey, I'll reveal the specific steps and strategies I used to overcome the stress that once ruled my life. Everything I learned, everything that helped me transform is in the book. If you're ready to find a way out, to truly take control of your life and your well-being, then I encourage you to keep going. The solutions are waiting for you. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized how deeply the stress had embedded itself into every corner of my life. I felt like I was constantly battling against a tide I couldn't escape. I was drained mentally and physically. My ability to focus was non-existent. And the more I tried to juggle everything, the more my health deteriorated. At that point, I knew I couldn't go on like this, but I had no idea where to start. The first thing I realized I needed was a moment to breathe. That might sound simple, but I had been running on autopilot for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to just stop. I had spent years thinking that the only way to handle stress was to push through it. But the more I pushed, the more it consumed me. It took a toll on my body. Constant headaches, a racing heart, sleepless nights, and an overwhelming sense of anxiety. I was physically exhausted, but the worst part was how my mind felt. Foggy and disconnected. I knew something had to change, but the question was how? The first thing I did was start with small moments of stillness. I set aside time every day, even if it was only 5 minutes, to sit quietly and breathe. First, this was incredibly difficult. My mind would race, thoughts coming in at a mile a minute. But I kept trying. I had to keep reminding myself that taking these small steps was essential for my health. And slowly I started to feel a shift. One of the key realizations that helped me along the way was understanding that mindfulness wasn't just about meditation or sitting quietly. It was about bringing my attention to the present moment. It was about becoming aware of my thoughts and feelings without judgment. I stopped trying to suppress the stress and instead I began to observe it. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the overwhelming pressure without feeling like I had to fight it. And that made a huge difference. I knew I needed to take it further, so I started to research mindfulness techniques and stress management strategies. I read about deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and cognitive reframing, but it was overwhelming. There was so much information, and I didn't know where to begin. I found myself lost in a sea of advice, unsure of what would actually work for me. But then I made a decision. I was going to simplify things. I focused on the basics. I started with the most practical, straightforward methods and slowly built from there. One of the simplest yet most powerful practices I adopted was taking breaks throughout the day. I had always pushed through my tasks without pause, thinking I had to keep going to get ahead. But I realized that this mindset wasn't serving me. Instead of focusing on how much I could get done in a day, I started prioritizing how well I could manage my energy. Taking a short walk, stretching, or even just stepping away from my desk for a few minutes made all the difference. It was like a reset button for my mind and body. These short breaks helped me to stay focused and avoid burnout. I also started setting boundaries. For years, I had been saying yes to everything, meetings, projects, social events, without considering my own needs. But I learned that saying yes to everything was a fast track to stress and exhaustion. I started to say no to things that didn't align with my priorities. I became more intentional with my time. And that simple act of saying no was incredibly empowering. But it wasn't just about managing my time or taking breaks. It was about changing the way I thought about stress. I had to shift my mindset completely. Stress had always been something I feared, something that paralyzed me. But I realized that stress was a natural part of life. It was inevitable. What mattered was how I responded to it. I stopped seeing stress as the enemy. Instead, I started to view it as a signal, a cue to take a step back and reassess. This shift in mindset didn't happen overnight. It took time. There were days when the stress felt overwhelming again. But each time I reminded myself of what I had learned. I reminded myself that I could handle it, that I had the tools to manage my stress effectively. And slowly, the panic attacks lessened, the constant pressure began to feel more manageable, and I regained control of my life. Along the way, I also discovered the importance of self-compassion. For years, I had been my own worst critic. I had high expectations for myself, but I was never satisfied with my performance. I would beat myself up for every mistake, every misstep. But as I began to practice mindfulness, I started to realize that self-compassion was essential to my well-being. I learned to forgive myself when I fell short, to be kind to myself when I made mistakes. This shift was pivotal in my healing journey. As I continued practicing mindfulness, I became more aware of my thoughts and emotions. I learned how to detach from them, how to observe them without getting caught up in them. This was one of the most freeing experiences I had. I was no longer ruled by my stress. I no longer felt like my emotions were controlling me. I had learned how to create space between myself and the chaos around me. But perhaps the most profound change came when I began to feel more present in my life. For so long, I had been living on autopilot, rushing from one task to the next, constantly thinking about what needed to be done next. But as I embraced mindfulness, I learned to be fully present in each moment. I found joy in the small things, the sound of birds chirping outside, the warmth of the sun on my face, the taste of my morning coffee. I stopped rushing through life and started savoring it. This newfound appreciation for the present moment was one of the greatest gifts mindfulness gave me. I can't say that everything was perfect after that. Stress still came. Life still threw curveballs. But I learned to face it with resilience. I learned to take it in stride. And I learned that by cultivating mindfulness, I could turn even the most challenging situations into opportunities for growth. Now, as I look back on that time, I see how far I've come. What once seemed insurmountable is now manageable. The weight of stress that once consumed me no longer has a hold on my life. And while I'm still learning and growing, I can confidently say that mindfulness has been the key to unlocking my peace. The tools and strategies that helped me transform my life are now available for you. If you're struggling with high stress levels and looking for a way to take control, the answers are within reach. I encourage you to grab a copy of Cultivating Mindfulness for High-Stress Professionals. This isn't just any low-content book. It's packed with expert advice and transformative strategies that help me turn my life around. It's a top-tier resource that can guide you in overcoming stress and cultivating mindfulness in your own unique way. Trust me, the insights in this book were exactly what I needed to make lasting change in my life, and they can do the same for you. Get your digital copy at LibriFFY.com and start your journey to a more peaceful, focused, and fulfilled life today. As I continued down this path, there were moments when I truly doubted if I could maintain the changes I had made. The old patterns of stress and overwhelm would creep in, and I would question whether the effort was worth it. But each time I reminded myself that change wasn't linear. There would be ups and downs. It was about persistence. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. One key insight I gained along the way was learning to trust in the process. I had always been someone who needed instant results, who expected to see immediate transformations. But mindfulness isn't something that's easily measured in terms of quick outcomes. It's about shifting your mindset and habits over time. It's about consistency, even when you don't see immediate changes. It's about staying the course, trusting that every moment of stillness, every mindful practice, is adding up to something bigger than you can see right away. The first few weeks of practicing mindfulness felt awkward and unfamiliar. I would sit in silence, my thoughts racing, my body fidgeting, unable to find peace. but I stuck with it. I realized that the discomfort was part of the process. It wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about embracing the process of change and being patient with myself. Over time, those moments of stillness began to feel more natural. The racing thoughts slowed down, and I began to experience a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. But the real shift came when I began applying mindfulness to the everyday moments of my life. It wasn't just about meditating for a few minutes a day. It was about bringing mindfulness into everything I did. I started paying attention to my breath while walking, while eating, while working. I learned to notice the tension in my body and release it. I became more attuned to the little things that brought me joy, like the feeling of a warm cup of tea in my hands or the sound of laughter shared with a friend. These small moments, when I allowed myself to fully experience them, became powerful reminders of how much peace and contentment I had been missing. Mindfulness also allowed me to stop and reflect on my thoughts before reacting. For years, I had been quick to react to stress, to snap at people, or to let my emotions take over. But through mindfulness, I learned to create a space between stimulus and response. I learned to pause, take a breath, and choose how I wanted to respond, rather than letting stress dictate my actions. This simple practice had an immense impact on my relationships, my work, and my overall well-being. As I deepened my mindfulness practice, I also started noticing other areas of my life that had been affected by stress. I had neglected my physical health for years. I wasn't exercising regularly, I was eating poorly, and I wasn't getting enough sleep. But mindfulness helped me become more aware of how my choices were impacting my body. I started making more conscious decisions, choosing healthier foods, moving my body more, and prioritizing rest. These changes weren't dramatic at first, but over time, they made a noticeable difference in how I felt physically and emotionally. One of the most profound shifts I experienced was in my work life. The high-stress environment I was in had always left me feeling overwhelmed and drained. But through mindfulness, I learned how to focus on the task at hand without getting bogged down by distractions or the pressure to perform perfectly. I became more present in meetings, more focused on the work I was doing, and less reactive to the stressors around me. Instead of feeling like I was constantly chasing after deadlines, I learned to approach my work with a sense of calm and clarity. I was no longer ruled by the stress of trying to keep up. But perhaps the most freeing realization of all was that I didn't have to do it alone. I wasn't the only one facing stress in the workplace. As I started to open up to colleagues and friends about my struggles with stress, I realized that many of them were feeling the same way. Together, we started to share tips and strategies for managing stress, for creating more mindful work environments, and for supporting one another. This sense of community and shared experience was incredibly powerful. I no longer felt isolated in my struggle. I realized that mindfulness wasn't just something I could practice on my own. It was something I could share with others to create a more supportive, balanced environment for everyone. And as I look back on my journey, I see how far I've come. The person I am today is someone who is more present, more aware, and more in control of my stress than I ever thought possible. I am no longer defined by the chaos of my professional life. I have learned how to live with more intention, more balance, and more peace. The tools and strategies I used to transform my life are now available for you too. If you are feeling overwhelmed by stress, if you're struggling to find peace amidst the chaos of your work and life, I encourage you to grab a copy of Cultivating Mindfulness for High-Stress Professionals. This isn't just any book. It's a comprehensive guide filled with expert advice and practical strategies that helped me completely transform my relationship with stress. This is the book that gave me the tools I needed to take control of my mind and my life. It's a top-tier resource that will help you do the same. Don't wait another day to start your journey toward a more balanced, peaceful life. Get your digital copy at LibriFFY.com and begin cultivating mindfulness today.